Wow. You can go on this, but I just want to say one thing before you get into this. And I started to allude to it last week, I thought, but bring back the computer. That's all I have to say.
It's funny because everyone was like so sick of the computer element.
I
They wanted
always
the
liked
human
the
element.
computer. I
And
always liked the computer because it included the human element. It included the element of the AP and the coaches poll. Those were included in that. And then they plugged in the strength of schedule, which none of these dimwits, and I'm calling them dimwits already, have to take into account. All right, go ahead, Ryan.
well, I think one thing you need to keep in mind with this college football playoff committee is this is all completely designed to be a television show. This is pure entertainment. These first, 5-6 weeks they do this, it is purely for consumption, purely for you and I, to idiots like us that make a goddamn podcast about football to rant and rave about. It is for social media clicks. It is the ultimate clickbait, actually, because they're essentially just trolling the American public with this show until the final show. That is the one that really counts. None of this means anything. It's just entertainment. They are definitely entertaining. I've got some theories about that, but yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think in the history of the playoff committee if the final four has been terribly egregious.
No, and
I
I
think
think you're right on that.
they
Yeah.
usually get it right by the final four, or if it wouldn't be four teams that everyone disagrees on. There might be one that I think Ohio State got in over a Big Ten champion Penn State one year, and that seemed a little bit ridiculous, but fuck both those schools. Who cares? But I don't remember. I guess I'm going to reserve judgment again this year until the final show, but they are showing some incredible inconsistencies, and I feel like it's a troll job almost on, especially on Michigan State. Because contrary to popular belief, Michigan State did indeed beat Michigan. That I think it's now 11 days ago. And correct me if I'm wrong. I believe we were both standing there in Callahan's backyard on a Saturday afternoon. I'm pretty sure I witnessed Michigan State finally defeating Michigan, but I think the final score was 37-33. But
Correct.
apparently,
everything you said is a truth so far.
Well, I am using facts, and apparently the playoff committee is using feelings as the committee chairman, I forget his fucking name, officially said after the show, or after the rankings were released, that they felt that Michigan was the more complete team. And that is why they ranked them number
Complete
6.
me.
Were they number 6 and State was
They
7?
are
Yeah, it must have been 6 and State. Well, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't mean shit. Because if Michigan State wins their last 3, possibly 4 games, if they make it to the Big Ten championship, they're going to go to the playoffs. If Michigan wins out, that would mean they would beat Ohio State. I think they could both be in the playoffs. So Michigan State can complain about it, and it's ridiculous. It's an in-state thing. I think everyone understands it, but it's definitely key to someone from Michigan. As Michigan fans have always, looked down their noses at Michigan State. So there's a reason why that little brother comment always comes out, and it's a little brother complex almost that Michigan State has to their big brother Michigan, who is a world-renowned educational institution. I think in the history of the game, you'd be surprised how close their resumes match up, as Michigan's is a little bloated, but there is an inferiority complex. So this playoff committee just fed into that, and that's why Michigan State fans are freaking out. Fortunately, I feel like this is a national outcry. This is not just Michigan State people. It seemed like the nation is seeing the injustice in Michigan being ranked ahead of Michigan State just 10 days after they beat them. In every level of football, the the first determination of where you stand is record, and if your records are the same, the very first tiebreaker is head to head. That is in pro football, that is in college football, uh, conferences and divisions. It's in high school football, it's in junior high, it's everywhere. So for the playoff committee to suddenly, not recognize that is just bizarre, especially when they made it a point even the week before a really good, a well executed idea that Oregon should be ranked ahead of Ohio State because they have the same record, and Oregon beat Ohio State the head to head. So they were following that. I think I praised them last week about that. There were a few instances in the rankings where they chose to put the head to head winner ahead of the other. Somehow they did not do that with Michigan State. And again, like as I preface this, it's meaningless because this is just a big TV show. This doesn't mean anything. Plus, State still holds their destiny in their hand, but it just is unreal, and it makes you question the judgment of this 13-person committee, whether they can execute by the end of this. Fortunately, I think it's going to be all worked out in the end, and most of this is just going to work itself out on the field. I don't think there's going to, well, we never know, but I think there's a pretty simple way that this is all going to work out, mainly because Michigan and Michigan State still have to face Ohio State. And I don't think either of them are going to beat Ohio State, so they're going to be out of this in a matter of weeks anyway. So unfortunately, but I don't know. As an outsider, I'm guessing you weren't quite as outraged, but I have a feeling you can see some injustice at least.
Well, the whole thing's puzzling. Like if you're just, and I don't know what, like you said, we've said over and over again, they're just guys sitting around looking at teams and making their judgment and putting their votes in. What's interesting, I follow bcsknowhow.com, which is the Twitter site that has the computer statistics. Mm-hmm. So they actually run the BCS computer analytics every week.
The same formula that they were.
Yeah, the same formula. So what's interesting, and this is worth talking about, is the computer would have put Michigan State behind Michigan.
Okay, that's interesting. Game control and other weird things you never hear about.
So this week, the simulated BCS ranking is Georgia, Alabama, Cincinnati, Oklahoma, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Michigan, Michigan State.
Wow.
Is your top 8. Then Oregon, and Oklahoma State. So that's all taken in whatever it weights, the AP poll, the coaches.
There's like 7 polls, I believe, if I remember that.
Strength of schedule.
Yeah.
All that. And by Michigan State essentially helped push Notre Dame up in that because they lost to Purdue.
Yeah.
And that helps Notre Dame. Yeah, I know. Well, in that scenario,
we'll get to that.
Doesn't help them in this scenario. But this is why I always felt like the BCS computer was so much more fun because like you could be like 9-0, but if the teams you beat all are losing behind you, you may not even be in the top 4.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
But that's why they brought this committee together to get rid of ridiculous things like that, where a program could miss that. A team was definitely deserving and didn't get there.
But is it?
Well, like we said, I don't think we've seen an egregious. No one by the end usually is horribly upset about the Final Four that they come up with. In the early stages, yes, but again, I think they're making a TV show, and I think they're just trying to be as dramatic as possible. The consequences are zero. It doesn't cost Michigan State a thing. It doesn't cost Michigan a thing. It doesn't cost them a thing to do this. And in fact, I think it brings in revenue because they do shit like this, because the whole world was talking about it today. I have another theory though, and it comes back to the Final Four, but I think they were making a big. They knew this would be a big deal. The chairman said that they debated this 6 versus 7 for a half hour, specifically whether State was going to be ahead of Michigan or not. I think they did this. They knew it would be a big deal to draw attention away from the fact that they continue to rank Alabama at number 2, which essentially guarantees, no matter what happens down the stretch, pretty much, that 2 SEC teams are going to be in the Final Four. Because you've got Georgia in the East, Alabama in the West. They will most likely meet in the SEC championship game, where Georgia's undefeated and Alabama has 1 loss. If Alabama wins that, you would say, well, the number 2 team just beat the number 1 team, and they're both have 1 loss, so we'll put them both in the Final Four. If Georgia wins, Alabama would have 2 losses, but they would say, well, we've had them ranked at number 2 all this time. They just lost to the number 1 team, as we would have predicted. So maybe we'll just move them down to 3 or 4, but they will remain in the playoff. So I think it's one of the, as egregious as I think the Michigan State versus Michigan ranking is, I think the more dire, of more consequence is them retaining Alabama, who barely beat LSU in Tuscaloosa this week, 20-14, and they could have easily lost on the last second pass. They're keeping them at number 2, despite their loss earlier to Texas A&M. They're just kind of quietly, oh yeah, it's just Alabama. They're just number 2. So they've essentially guaranteed, no matter what happens going forward, that they're going to have 2 SEC teams in, which I think it's just bullshit. I mean, it's just reputation. It is ratings. But furthermore, I think what this is leading to, and you're actually going to like this, and you've mentioned this several times. They're going to pick the 4 teams that bring in the greatest ratings and will bring in the greatest revenue. And the way this is set up, Ohio State's definitely going to be in. And just like I said, Georgia and Alabama are already in. I think this is paving the way for Notre Dame to be the number 4 team. And you'll be excited to follow this. And maybe you've already seen how this most likely will play out anyway. But Notre Dame is now ranked number 9. They moved up from number 10, I believe you were last week.
Yeah.
So you've got to move up five spots. Essentially, 5 teams need to move out of your way. Well, like I said, I think both Michigan and Michigan State are going to move out of the way and lose to Ohio State. If one of those beats Ohio State and the other loses, there's going to be 2 teams. Ohio State's going to get, they'll have 2 losses. Notre Dame will move past that. Regardless, I think Michigan and Michigan State are going to be gone out of that, at least out of Notre Dame's way. So then you've got Cincinnati, Oklahoma. No, Oklahoma is not. Well,
Oklahoma's 8.
Okay, yeah, they are 8 for this. I think Oklahoma is probably going to lose at some point because they always fuck this up. They'll probably lose to Oklahoma State, and in fact, I think they'll probably have to. If I have this right, they might even have to beat Oklahoma State twice. Because they'll play them in the regular season, and I think they'd play in the championship game. So
that would be back-to-back weeks too, because the last game of the season is Oklahoma State. I thought when I looked at that on the schedule.
I could be wrong about that, but my thesis is Oklahoma is not that great. I think we've all seen that. They've been pretty mediocre. I think they're going to find a way to fuck this up. I have the same thought about Oregon and Cincinnati. Because I mean, you've seen Cincinnati. They got past Notre Dame, and this is where the interesting thing is going to come up. But this is where I think the committee is paving the way for teams that bring in the largest revenues and get the most eyes on their precious playoff. And Notre Dame would be that 4th team easily. So I think they would, even with the same record, and even if Cincinnati had the head-to-head over Notre Dame, they will let Notre Dame in because they just set the precedent. They can just say, we feel that Notre Dame is the better team. And they could say the early loss versus the late loss, makes the difference. So I'm saying this 4 weeks out, I believe is the final poll. I think Notre Dame is going to be your number 4 team. Now, Notre Dame, of course, has to win out. And they're going to take advantage of the easy schedule down the stretch that you mentioned in previous weeks. I think what did you say? Virginia would be their most difficult
Yeah,
game.
that's this week. So once that's
Okay.
out of the way, it's a win. It's definitely a win out after
Well,
that point.
you heard it here first, and not from a domer like you. I'm saying Notre Dame's making this playoff, and as long as you take care of Virginia this week, if you guys take care of your business, you guys are going to be in, because this committee is starting to set up things in a perfect fashion for you. It's just a few things need to work themselves out, but I think they will.
Yeah, I mean, I said that a few weeks ago, not even being as a domer, being as once you saw this committee come in, that they've got an agenda. And we've agreed on the agenda. The agenda is to generate revenue for college football.
Yeah.
That's why it's a show, to your point.
Mm-hmm.
It's generating revenue for college football. They're getting TV revenue by putting these folks on a show. I
It
mean,
sucks, but it's my favorite show on TV. I am dying for Tuesday nights when it comes out, and it was like extra frustrating last night because they pushed it back because they're starting their college basketball season, so they played it between games. It was normally it's at 7 o'clock here. It was like 9:30 here before they had the show on. I was just going crazy, and then they did that shit, which drove me even more crazy. But now I'm going to be dying next week to go see it at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday. Not much going on in mid Michigan in November, so I think they've got us where they want us, and I'm not too ashamed to admit I have fallen for their trick. I am spending the first 15 minutes, 20 minutes of our podcast devoted to them and their shenanigans. So you win, College Football Playoff Committee, but hopefully cooler heads will prevail, and they will actually there will be some justice by the end of it. And again, I think they'll probably get bailed out, as things are so complicated right now with so many weeks to go and so many different things can happen. Usually these things work themselves out, but we're starting to see the path and how things could work out. And I'm seeing a favorable path for your Notre Dame Fighting Irish.
well, it's very favorable to your point when you're trying to get the teams in there that generate the most TV revenue, and names like Cincinnati and Oregon just don't do that for them.
Yeah,
which unfortunately in has always been an issue with college football from whenever you talk about college football, going way back to when it used to just be like following the AP polls and the coaches polls. I mean, there always seems to have been favoritism from Notre Dame towards Notre Dame, which is why I've never, when someone tells me they hate Notre Dame, I'm like, I get it. I understand why. Like I don't even try to say, there's no argument from me. I get it, because you don't see it as much when you're a younger kid. Like, you don't get what's really going on. But as I got older and watched, I'd be like, really? But for the college committee to put them in, if somehow Cincinnati is not lost or something like that, would just be complete. That would
just set the precedent.
Completely ridiculous.
If they had held to their standard that they had been doing, that we praise them for, of putting, like I said, the head-to-head winners ahead of, Oregon ahead of Ohio State, then they would have nothing to stand up. And now that they've set the precedent that none of this fucking matters, that they can easily do this to Cincinnati. So I think that is my conspiracy theory. So